Welcome to another episode of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. My name is Chooks, and I'll be your host for today. Today, we're very lucky to have Sheona Thomson from QUT, who's going to be talking to us or elaborating on ensuring integrity in assessment design and delivery. Sheona, would you like to introduce yourself to give us a little bit about your background, your work focus, your area of expertise, and any form of research you've done in the past as well?
Okay, thanks, Chooks. I actually have two roles at QUT. I'm a strategic lead for assessment and academic integrity in the QUT Academy of Learning and which is inside the Learning and Teaching unit. But then I'm also a senior lecturer in architecture in the Faculty of Engineering at QUT, and I teach a very large first-year core unit to all of the students actually across two schools, the School of Architecture and Built Environment and the School of Design. I have been working in the Learning and Teaching unit for about 9 years now. One big project I did a few years back was lead the review of our assessment and feedback policy, and that kind of got me into working on academic integrity. And I've been involved in a number of pilots of new technologies that can help with assessment and academic integrity at QUT. I've done some research with recently some colleagues at Curtin looking into educator beliefs and perspectives about academic integrity in the classroom. And I just find it an endlessly fascinating field to be involved in higher education. And particularly with the recent challenges of COVID and, shifting everything online and people having to rethink their approach to assessment quite significantly because of not being able to run assessment in the sort of modes that they were used to, in particular on-campus exams.
Perfect. Thanks for that introduction. I think we'll just go right into it, considering we're talking about ensuring integrity in assessment, design, and delivery. My question, or my very first question, is why is this important? Why is integrity in assessment, design, and delivery important? And what does that mean for QUT?
Well, assessment, supposedly the objective measure of our students' capability. At the end of the day, all of those assessments completed by students in the, across their degree are really the evidence that we have to warrant that they're leaving university with the required or expected skills and knowledge. So it would be kind of a disaster if students get out into the world, start working and can't do their jobs or have no clue about what they're doing because they've kind of dodged the work while they're at university. And the ramifications for that are particularly felt by more than the individual, and I think integrity is also the underpinning value. We have integrity as one of our assessment values, ascribed in policy, along with validity and relevance and those sort of things. But integrity is really underpinning value because, we work hard to design assessments that are aligned to intended learning outcomes and assessment that's valid and relevant. But without integrity, those values are neutralised or completely undermined. So, it sort of underpins everything we do, and it underpins that kind of trust model, society has with universities, that we are, when we give students degrees, we're saying these guys can do what we say they can do.
Excellent. Knowing that integrity just doesn't sit with students, and knowing that the staff and the university in general is responsible for ensuring integrity with assessments, who in particular is responsible for imbibing that culture within the university and ensuring, and maybe just a little bit talk to us about how this is done at QUT.
Okay, so the late, great and very wonderful Tracy Brettag taught us all academic integrity is everybody's business, so it's a shared responsibility. Oftentimes we do kind of put a lot of attention on students, set the expectations with them. But, my feeling is that it's educators in the classroom, so lecturers, tutors, demonstrators, all those people that kind of come work with students in classes and practicals and studios and what have you. They're the people that have the greatest opportunity to collectively create that culture and nurture it. Because if you think about encounters on their way to university, someone who's talking about academic integrity, modelling academic integrity, showing students how to complete their assessments with integrity, then becomes second nature, which is, they're the opportunities. I think every opportunity of interaction in a classroom, seeing the expectations inside units or courses. And I thought it's really important for educators to develop their empathy for the student point of view in assessment, recognising that this viewpoint actually is a multitude of diverse viewpoints. Students have multiple struggles as they're getting used to the university learning environment. So we have to be explicit. We can't assume that students know what we need them to know about academic integrity to the university. So that first year transition point is really important for setting the standards, setting the expectations, but also, helping students as much as we can. At QUT, since sort of 20, really, we've been bolstering our staff development around this, and particularly associating it with Assess 9. So when we introduced our current assessment policy sort of back in 2017, we did make this emphasis on integrity as a principle in assessment design, and we correspondingly in the academic integrity policy, we linked professional integrity to academic integrity. So you can see how in assessment design, being authentic, giving students opportunities to work through professional scenarios in assessment, it all can form a kind of coherent picture. But I think it's difficult, it's a complex scene, and you need to be able to see that bigger picture to understand where certain design features or technology supports can have the best impact in assessment design. And also there's such a diversity of students and disciplines, so the assessment sort of space in health is very different to creative industries, is very different to engineering, for example. So they each have their own challenges. I think there's been some great research done by Martine Peters, who's from the University of Quebec in Outaouais. She's in the Graduate School of Education, and her colleagues, they look at educator approaches to academic integrity in the classroom that highlights a diversity of educator perspectives. From people who are really quite disinterested, those who happily collaborate with language and learning support people, through to full-on evangelists and ambassadorial types. So I think we always have that spectrum of educators working inside a university, and it's good to know that, because then we can kind of, look where we can target our efforts to help educators build the culture of integrity in their classroom. But on the other hand, people's plates are very full with all sorts of work to do. But I do believe there's room for academic integrity thinking. And it's just about how people see that it can be infused or embedded into their practice, like overlaying integrity thinking with the assessment design cycle and that sort of thing.
Great. It's quite exciting to see that there's been a lot of work in that space and how QUT is actually developing models or strategies to build on that. Now, with COVID last year, we've suddenly had to move to remote learning, and that would definitely bring some challenges when it comes to ensuring equity of students' work and also level of integrity in terms of delivery of the assessments, most particularly. What are universities doing to ensure integrity of the assessments, especially with the delivery, knowing that we've moved to remote learning?
Well, we very quickly sort of worked on just helping educators with rethinking their assessment design, because obviously there was a lot of stuff that had to happen quickly. When all on-campus exams, for example, became impossible, what could be done in that space. And we don't have an online proctoring solution at QUT, so we had to help people think through how you would translate the conditions that they were used to in an invigilated physical environment on campus into a non-invigilated online environment. So, how do you translate those conditions? And there was lots of great resources that appeared, in particular, some excellent flowcharts for, making decisions about whether or not you really needed to run an exam or whether you could change your assessment. So that was another thing that happened. We were able to, people were able to make changes to their assessment patterns at a time in the semester where they ordinarily wouldn't have been able to do that, because that's pretty locked down kind of stuff. We had to get people thinking about maintaining fairness and validity, and also, as you mentioned, equivalence, and equity. Thinking about students' access to technology, whether or not they'd want to, they'd be able to do the sorts of things we needed them to do in that online space. And I'm sure that seemed to me to be the challenge across the sector. It's just that some universities were able to kind of move into sort of online invigilated spaces, but we thought about things like, test conditions, timing, question pools, what kind of characteristics of online testing increase the integrity of an assessment in the absence of an invigilator. I mean, some faculties just said, okay, well, we'll just won't do an exam. We'll just give students an assignment and we'll completely rethink about what we're going to do. But there were certainly disciplines that had to mimic as best as possible what they'd done in physical spaces, because they had accreditation requirements and that sort of thing, that some organisations or accrediting bodies sort of, removed restrictions so that exams could be held in a different way. But that has been the challenge, because there's a lot of assessment that isn't invigilated that we do already. So it's really around that kind of exam space. Once that physical on-campus invigilation wasn't possible, what's the alternative? And I mean, it's we're still thinking through that and trying to get better at it every time. But now we've moved into that sort of hybrid mode where, we have students who can come back on campus and study who still are choosing to be online or forced to be online because they're not in the country. So, what do we do with kind of desire to get all the exams back on campus when there are some students who just won't be able to do that? What's the equity and equivalence there? So, yeah.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. I think my next question is, you may have already responded to this, looking at strategies to support academics, but I'm going to reframe that, because you've already talked about how you were supporting, or how the institution supported academics with rethinking assessment. But now, for this question, I'm going to look at strategies that worked. What are some strategies that worked from last year, or from your experience, that might have help with supporting academics with ensuring integrity in assessment design and also its delivery?
Well, I think in some areas, the redesigned exams, which we were referring to as timed online assessments, they actually became better experiences for students, and feedback from students indicated that they were less stressful, and in most cases students had more time to work through things. There was a certain flexibility about when students could do the exam and that sort of thing. I think those things, that they're, in the cases where flexibility, for example, was a factor, that was perceived as positive by students. I mean, like we did have issues, some problems and that sort of thing. But all of those problems become things to learn from and to improve on in the next instance. I think, the other thing that we did that we had to think about, okay, so what if we do suspect there's a problem? What do we do to follow up on that, and thinking about what could be some sort of ways that we could get students to verify what they'd done if there were some questions about it. And yeah, I mean, some some academics actually then built in kind of a Viva component into their exam, so that the students sat the exam and then they got very short sort of Viva with the lecturer. Yeah. And we got some great feedback about that as well. Students who were really pleased to be able to have that kind of conversation about what they knew and what they learned in that sort of face-to-face way, particularly after having been kind of, banished from campus and losing all those potentials for more frequent interaction with teachers. So, yeah, that was a positive thing.
Thanks for listening. This concludes part 1 of our conversation. Please join us again for part 2.